Absolute value equations and inequalities, the last section for chapter 1. Let's go get 'em. First, a little reminder of what an absolute value is. Absolute value means distance from zero. So that means we have always a positive and negative that can have the same absolute value answer. Just like this, 4 and -4, the absolute value, both of those would be 4 because it's distance. Distance is always positive. Whenever you have an equation with an absolute value sign, you will always have two different answers. In this case, I would have 2x minus 1 is equal to 5. And then I also want to write out what the negative answer might be. So I have to write out two separate equations to solve. So when I'm solving these, the process is still the same. I'm still going to be adding 1 to both sides on the left-hand side. And I would get x is equal to 3. Or I would still add 1 to x is equal to -4. Divide by 2, I get x is equal to -2. So these are my two answers that I could have for x. And if you always want to check your answer, you can always plug it back in to see if they can give you a positive 5. Pause the video and attempt the next problem by yourself. You should have gotten that x is going to be equal to 2/3 or -2. You can look back at my work to check your answer. Again, absolute value should always have two different answers. Same type of problem, however, whenever you have other numbers that are not part of my absolute value, I have to get rid of those numbers before I can set my two equations. So I'm going to pretend like this box is my unknown. First, I have to get that box all by itself. So first I'm going to add 1 to both sides of my equation. So I'd have 3, and then the box, which is the absolute value of x plus 2, is going to be equal to 9. Again, I need to get the box by itself, so I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. And I get the box, which is the absolute value of x plus 2, is equal to 3. Now that I have my box by itself, this is where I want to set up my two separate equations. I'd have x plus 2 is going to be equal to 3. And remember, you have to still set up your negative answer and solve for both of those. So x is going to be equal to, still subtract them both problems, and it would be 1 or -5. I want you to pause the video and attempt the next problem by yourself. And you should have gotten that x is going to be equal to either -7 or -11. Again, you have to make sure to get your box by itself, the absolute value by itself, before you can set up your two equations. We're going to do the same thing here. However, we are going to have to check for extraneous solutions. What does that mean? Whenever you have, with certain equations, an x on both sides of the equal sign like this, you might come up with an answer that doesn't actually work. So first, we already have my box by itself. So since the absolute value is by itself, we're going to set up two equations. We're going to have the box, which is the absolute value, equal to a positive 4x plus 5. And then we're also going to have the box, which is the absolute value, is equal to a negative. And you always want to make sure to put this in parentheses because it's the whole thing must be negative. So when I'm solving this on the left-hand side, I'm first going to subtract 3x. So I have 2 is equal to x plus 5, subtract 5. -3 is equal to x on the left-hand side. Now once I distribute this negative sign in, that would give me a -4x and a -5. So I have 3x plus 2 is equal to -4x minus 5. I'm going to add 4x to both sides. I get 7x plus 2 is equal to -5 minus 2. And you would get -7. So x would be equal to -1. Now this is the part. Since you have x's on both sides of the equation, you want to check your work. So first with my -3, I'm going to write my absolute value of 3 times -3 plus 2 absolute value is equal to 4 times -3 plus 5. Now I'm going to solve this. This becomes a negative 9 plus 2, and again the absolute value of it, which is actually going to be a negative 7. So on the left-hand side of this equation would be a positive 7, because its absolute value is a positive number. It's equal to, this becomes a negative 12 plus 5, which is a negative 7. Well, a positive and negative do not work, so no, that is not a good answer. Even though we came up with an answer, it's still not a good answer. So now I want you to pause the video and then check your second answer. And you should have gotten that. 1 is equal to 1, so this is my only solution to this problem. So this next problem is like what we've already done. My box is by itself, so I'm going to have 2x minus 1 is less than 5. I also have to write my negative sign. 2x minus 1. Here's the tricky part. I'm going to make this a negative 5. However, that's like dividing by a negative. Once you divide by a negative when you're dealing with inequalities, you have to flip the sign. The other part when you have absolute values, you have to know, is this an and statement or an or statement? Well, I always look at my original inequality sign. This says less than, so that means it's going to be an and statement. I want you to pause the video and solve it and check your answers with mine. I want you to pause the video right now and attempt to do this problem, like the previous one, by yourself. Again, the first thing you should do is set up your two different inequalities. Remember, always flipping the sign when you write your negative solution. So this is what your two equations should look like. It says great or. This is a great or, so this would be an or statement. Again, this is my negative solution, so I have to flip my sign. Now, if you didn't already, I want you to pause and attempt the rest of the problem by yourself. So this is what your graph should look like with your answers. Now if you want to test a problem here, you have to make sure to test where the graph shows. If I want to test 0, let's say, 0 is not on my graph. So that means when I plug it into my equation, it should make the statement false. So is 0 greater than or equal to 1? No, and it shouldn't be. I didn't graph from the point of 1 where 0 is overlapping. Is 0 less than or equal to negative 5? No. And it shouldn't be because it's not on my graph. So that is all you got. Make sure you took great grand notes and have a wonderful evening.